Hey everyone, I've got here my third design team project for Lavender Blue journals. It's a big one. It's full of lace and ruffles and sari and vintage textiles, and it's chockers. It's pretty big too. So the cover, there's a little belly band on the cover, and there are 3 tags. These are super special. So my mum actually made these, not for this journal, but she had some fun in my craft space and made these little tags. And they've got some embroidered and beaded trim on them that came from India that I've collected. And so they're just little cards that you can journal on, and they just slip into this pocket. The cover is a collage of a million different pieces of fabric. There's some vintage velvet. Here also there's some beaded trim down the bottom, some upholstery, some lace, and I've collaged that all over this headscarf that I hacked into pieces. Some vintage lace here, and a charm with a little key. So that's the front, and all of this is sewed on. The closure is just 2 pieces of lace that I've sewn into the cover. So you can take that off, or you can just tie it as a bow. So it's 100 pages front and back. It measures about 7.5 inches wide by 10 inches long, and the mouth is about 5 inches, but that reduces when you take all of the ephemera out and everything is removable. So it's sort of blank on the inside. It's full of scrapbooking paper, vintage paper, the Shabby backing paper, digital print from Lavender Blue, and there's a whole wad of ephemera, vintage, handmade, that you can remove. So when you open up, this is the cover. This is some vintage wallpaper, and there's a couple of things in here. There's a beautiful sheen to this. It's gorgeous. And a little lace pocket for you to hide your little things in. A few journaling cards, a postcard printable, and part of an old letter writing set that I really like including in my journals. An old button, actually this is a vintage button that I've turned into a little button card. And this charm here is removable with this paper clip. And that here is a handmade charm that I've made with Swarovski crystals, some bead ends, an acrylic bead, a faux pearl, and I thought that just works really well. It's a handmade journaling card here that I've backed onto some wine-dyed paper. This is just a napkin decoupage on some book page. Little belly band here. The first page, or the first cover thingy, is a pouch that I've made from a few pieces of fabric. There's a vintage cotton, vintage upholstery, a few bits of lace, this pink embroidered and beaded lace with some pearl decoration on it, and a fabric and vintage button cluster that I made, and this has just been pinned in, so it's removable. It's just pinned in with a safety clip. And then here is just another journaling card that I've made with some oh my gosh, what do you call it? Some napkins, some paper napkin, a little piece of ephemera for you to journal on. This is a vintage swap card. They were in perfect condition because the whole box was unopened when I got them, and they're really pretty. And this really sweet angel scrapbooking paper that I found at some secondhand store. There's a lot of tabs made from scrapbooking cardstock along the ends of the pages. There's just a little bit of ephemera here, a little card, and some vintage printables that are letters. These are also from Lavender Blue, and they're beautiful, and I've just inked them up and aged them a little bit. The Shabby backing paper's printable. It's really lovely. It's got roses, some blues, greens and yellows, and some lace and sari trim. Another one of the Shabby backing papers, and a pocket made of lace that I've coffee dyed. This came from an old vintage wallpaper sampler. Now this isn't real wallpaper. This is just a cutout from that book that I've backed onto some tea-dyed paper for some journaling. So there's a lot of specialty papers and belly bands. Here is some gold shimmery embossed specialty paper with some lace belly bands and a vintage illustration. Oh, actually, it's a copy of a painting for you to journal on. A little pocket in here with a few things for you to write on and just to keep. Some tiny little things. This is a real vintage slide that I covered with some vintage sheet music, added a little butterfly, and there's a little hydrangea in there. Another little cardstock tab. This blue inked up paper is partly tea, partly food colouring. It's pretty cool. It's got some washout through it, which I thought was a really fun effect. And an old greeting card that is unused with these beautiful floral illustrations. Some more sari trim ruffle and scrapbooking paper that's been backed with some vintage magazine illustration, and there's a sequin belly band and some vintage notes in Polish. Another little piece that I've cut out from, I believe this was a book about ages, just fashion ages throughout the years, and I thought that that was beautiful. And that here is some antique pianola roll paper. I love adding that into journals. An envelope for you to hide a few things in or journal in. A lot of tea-dyed paper. A cardstock journaling card from one of my scrapbooking kits. These are some antique book pages and sentiments. This came from a calendar that has a daily sentiment, which I thought was really sweet. Some more sentiments about being good in the world, things that people have learned or bits of advice, and a poem. And there's a lace belly band here with some more scrapbooking paper. This is sort of like a dusty pink with these really cute flowers on it. So everything is removable, and then when you remove everything, it turns out pretty much blank. I thought that this worked really well. It's just the packet of a vintage sewing pattern and some more wine-dyed paper. Then you have here some little bits of ephemera for you to journal on, and a vintage letter from India, I believe. This is one of those C4 envelopes that I've just covered in scrapbooking paper. And there's a little scrapbooking tab. And there's a little faux ticket that I made. And a little journaling card. Some more scrapbooking paper. This one's got a nice sheen to it. I think it's meant to replicate some vintage wallpaper. And a tassel trim that I found at a secondhand store. This is Lavender Blue's printable, the Shabby backing papers. It's really pretty, and it worked really well with this 6x6 inch scrapbooking cardstock, and I've just made here a little collage card. And I've used a lot of design papers from magazines and stuff, and a vintage button. A little faux ticket. And some more printable sheets. A vintage greeting card. Again, it's unused, but I thought the florals worked really well, and it's got that gold shine to it. It's wonderful. some scrapbooking paper, these beautiful blue flowers, it really pops, and some more cardstock tabs. Some vintage notes. The aging on this is really, really pretty, and I believe this is in Polish. There's a lot of Polish ephemera that I have in my stash. An illustrated card. This is a print that I found at a secondhand store. And there's a couple pieces here. And some illustrations of roses that came from a vintage book. I had like 100 of these. A couple more illustrations of gorgeous flowers for you to fussy cut and use, and some vintage recipe. And I've clipped that onto some tea-dyed paper that I also dyed with a bit of food colouring. This is a vintage menu from the 50s that came from some dinner that happened in November of 1957. And it's a series of menu cards that give sketches of a few queens of England who succeeded to the throne in their own right. And you've got that illustration here. This wonderful, wonderful piece of paper, it's very special. It came from an encyclopedia from 1779. And I'm actually going to use those encyclopedias, but this was one of the inner pages that fell out, so I've used it in this journal. There is some pink tea-dyed paper, so it's tea and a bit of pink food colouring, and an illustration that came out of a page of illustrations made by this woman, Lola 80s, from 1971. This one might actually be from 1973. Another little journaling card, napkin decoupaged, that I've put onto some linen cardstock. Wine-dyed papers, another napkin decoupaged journaling card. Some antique pianola roll paper. It's beautiful, greeny blue. There's so many aging marks on here, it's stunning. You can use that to journal something secret. And some scrapbooking cardstock that I thought worked really well with a little fairy and a flower. These photographs are just prints that were put in a magazine that I've taken out, backed onto some cardstock for you to write tiny little precious things that are important to you. And this came from a vintage photo album. So you actually put your photos into here, but I've taken off the plastic covering and you can now use this as journaling space. And I really love the roses on here. And there's some writing about truth and being loving. You can write little memories. I thought that worked really well. This is the little brother dude to the blue journaling, the blue vintage card, vintage swap card that was also in fabulous condition, and some embossed, it's almost like fabric, and it shimmers, and it's in this beautiful light blue. And here is the center. Actually, no, it's not. This is the center, and there's a whole bunch of pockets, and this is the Shabby backing papers printable. I've made here a little journaling card with an illustration of these wonderful ladies wearing these beautiful, beautiful gowns. This is from another magazine about fashion, with some old paper from an old note writing pad. Another little sentiment. You give but little when you give of your possessions. It is when you give of yourself that you truly give. That's a little sentiment by Khalil Gibran, one of my favorites to include. And another little image that's been backed into some cardstock. A little piece of ephemera. These illustrations are so pretty, and they work really well with this journal. This is a vintage envelope that I decoupaged with a butterfly napkin for you to hide little things into, and some paisley scrapbooking cardstock, and a sari ruffle from India, a handmade napkin decoupaged tag that I've backed onto some of my pink paper, that this is dyed with wine and tea, and a little vellum piece with some sentiments on it. You can use however you please. Some old packaging, deep purple anglais ruffle, a beautiful, beautiful, this is very bright pink, embroidered piece of lace with an illustration that came from a book of women and, well, cultures and their costumes. So you can colour that in or hold it as it is, and it is double-sided. And some typewritten notes here, also in Polish. Another pink envelope that I decoupaged with some napkins. These are all empty and are made for you to fill with very precious things. Some more illustrations from various magazines and vintage books. This is also another illustration with a beautiful teacup of chamomile tea and some sweet words on what beauty is. And there are plenty of little tags that I've included from scrapbooking paper, very pretty illustration. And you can use these however you please. I've used as decorations, some more tabs, some of Fiona's Shabby backing papers, Paris theme with some vintage sari ruffle. And that mint is beautiful. This is the coolest thing ever. So this is a naturally aged and torn sage khaki green. It's beautiful writing. This is from 19... I have no idea what 19, but it is old. I got this, a bunch of other envelopes from between 1903 and 1910, but I can't quite read where this one comes from. And it's empty, but it is a piece of history that will belong to one person who has this journal, which I think is very special. Some specialty sheen pink paper. A journaling card. This is just another image from a vintage book on flower arrangements that I backed onto some tea-dyed paper, and that works well with this green paper. Another illustration, flower arranging. This came from a children's encyclopedia, and they always have those beautiful middle pages with illustrations of butterflies and dragonflies, and so I found this one in my stash which I wanted to include because it's very special. Another journaling card. This is just napkin decoupage onto some cardstock, some linen pink cardstock, vintage cotton that's just been sewn onto this one page, and the Shabby backing papers printable kit. This is a piece of old bulletin. It's so delicate, but the pink is stunning. And this was just the one page of pink in this one bulletin from 1958. It's very pinky, but I don't think the camera's picking it up. And that sits right in here with some vintage stamps from Poland. Another little pocket with some vintage, actually no, this isn't vintage lace, this is embroidered lace that I've tea-dyed and aged, but I do not believe it is vintage. And there are some ruffles of scarves in like a beautiful blue, and this gorgeous illustration, this woman wearing a blue gown. And that also came from some fashion book that I have cut to pieces. And this is silvery and blue and just so pretty. And it worked really well with this snippet of scarf that I've just squished up and sewn onto the side. I think that's my favourite page. Some more printable. The other side of that envelope that I decoupaged with a couple of pieces of ephemera, a dyed index card. This came from a wallpaper samples book that I've turned into a little bookmark. Some vintage scorecards for some games. A dyed index card. Some more paper that I've dyed in wine. A lovely illustration here. This beautiful, beautiful gown. Some scrapbooking paper. A lot of it is cardstock scrapbooking paper. More of that dusty pink. Those tiny little flowers. Dyed paper, antique paper. It's a vintage photograph. It's a beautiful garden. Now these, I've got a few of these. So I collect these old books that I find on the side of the street during council cleanups. And there's a lot of old books. And a lot of the insides, look at that aging. It is wonderful. A lot of them have inscriptions of names. And this, I don't know, R. Oramley Martin. The 1st of June of 1940. That is also one of those really special pieces of history that will belong to one person. And I love that. That's one of my favourite things about junk journals. Some instructions on making a really cute little dress for the little kid. Like a little nightie, which is pretty adorable. Some shabby backing papers from Fiona's kit. It's got really lovely script on here. This is an illustration from a vintage book on herbs that tells you on the back what it is. And an alphabetical list of dances that are typewritten in blue, which worked really well with this blue dyed paper. A vintage postcard. It's unused, but the French theme worked really well with the French shabby backing papers. Another little card. And more of that gold embossed specialty paper. Some vintage photographs. I thought that this was really beautiful. I had this in my stash. It's a wedding and someone's garden, which they must have really liked. The Shabby backing papers printable kit from Lavender Blue. A few bits of writing paper here. These are just some vintage writing pads and letter writing sets for some journaling space. Another one of those illustrations from that book on herbs. And this wonderful green piece of notes, which I thought the colour just corresponded really well with the journal. The back of that angel scrapbooking paper. Some more pockets and a napkin decoupage journaling card. And the last image of illustrations, which is really pretty and can be fussy cut. And then I've made here a tiny little notebook with, I think it's 20 pages for your tiny thoughts. And there's the back. So I'm going to link the Etsy listing in the description box and a few other bits of information, like the dimensions and how many pages are in there. But yeah, that's it for this one. Thanks, guys.